First of all, welcome to this breakout. My name is Janamitra Devan, and I'm the B20 senior advisor to Rifat Bey, as well as in the steering committee, and I've been asked to moderate this session with the luminaries that you see sitting by my side. So I'm really pleased that you can attend this. As in a way, a closing plenary, a closing of thoughts, right, from what has come about from the B20. I think we've had a great year, a terrific year, and certainly congratulations and pats on the back, right, are certainly welcoming at this point for the business community. I think terrific achievement all around. There has been a significant number of developments and recommendations that have come from the 6 task forces. I won't go through each of the task forces, but across the board, I think we've seen some really exciting recommendations. But as they say, all good things must come to an end, right? And the Turkish term is ending, but I will also add that good things will surely happen when the Chinese presidency takes over. So this is a particular transition moment for all of us to contemplate, right, on what has come from these sessions. The purpose of this parallel session, let me just spend a few minutes, right, to talk a little bit about it. There are literally 2 purposes. One is we want to be able to crystallize and nuance the messages that are coming out of the B20, right? Obviously, we've got the leaders meeting tomorrow as well. Share that with you, right, and get feedback, right, from this group. My colleague is doing the same thing in the other group, right, on growth and investments. This one we're dealing with generally the trade, jobs, and competitiveness issues. So that's the first purpose, to get that feedback, to share with you the findings and so on. The second one is to get your inputs and the inputs of the panelists as well on the priorities for business that still have not been problem solved, right? That we should be thinking about potentially sharing it with our Chinese colleagues, right, as they are beginning to formulate their formal agenda going forward. So I think this is an opportunity to share those thoughts as well. So those are the 2 purposes that I have in mind. The process, let me talk a little bit about the process of how we're going to do this. I'm first going to ask the 3 task force leaders who are with us on the panel, right? So we've got Ali Koj on my left and Gulay Sabanji on my right, as well as Ayhan Bey, right, who led the anti-corruption task force. And I'll be asking them to spend about 5 to 7 minutes, right, and give us a capture. I know that's a tall order, right, but I'm going to call on their skills of delivering their elevator pitch, right, in the 6 to 7 minutes, right? And then after that, with the other panelists that you have, I'm going to ask each of them to address a particular point, right, that they are experts in or have raised with me, and basically to ask them to distill their statement in 2 minutes, right? And the idea, and I'm trying to keep this as tight as possible because we've got 1 hour, 15 minutes, so that we can get a broader participation from everyone in the room. So that's the flow. Let's make it as interactive as possible, and I would also ask the panelists to give a little bit of a forward-looking spin, right, on what you have. I think we've done quite a bit backward-looking. What do we do going forward? So with that said, I'm going to ask Ms. Sabanji, Chairwoman Sabanji, holding and coordinating chair. I don't need to go too much. She's a well-recognized personality in the global economy. And she was also the coordinating chair for the B20 Turkey trade task force. Mainly on the on ratification and implementation of the trade facilitation agreement.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jean Mitra, but let me just, I can even maybe do it less than 5 minutes.
I'll take the extra time.
Okay, I give Ali the extra time. Okay, then the trade task force last year, about this time of the year, when we get the recommendations of the Australian task force. We had I want to thank the members of the trade task force, first of all. We had a very good inclusion, more than 100 members, very good attendance in the meetings. One of the first things we did in January was to focus and to look what could be a implementable win position for the trade task force. And the first thing came out is we identified the trade facilitation agreement, that we can do something about it. And I think the whole members have worked very hard in advocating in their own countries. Last year in December, we had only one country who ratified the agreement. This year, we have 51 countries who ratified the agreement, but the good thing about it is that the last 6 months, the first 6 months, it was only 6 countries. The last 6 months, it's 45 countries. So for the Chinese friends, we are giving a already speeded up ratification process, which I'm sure they can even do better than us and finalize this, because you know 2/3 of the WTO members are needed to ratify in order to this agreement to be effective for the world. So we need to go 107. We are 51. I'm sure they can do it in 6 months, knowing the Chinese, if they put their minds to it. And I'm sure they can do it. So that's the first one. Of course, ratifying the agreement does not finish the whole thing. There are so many in details. The second recommendation we have, which is an item which I'm sorry to say, but has not been doing very well. The G20 countries are not doing very well. First of all, ratifying 10 out of 20 G20 country has ratified the agreement. So for tomorrow's work, first of all, we need the other 10 to ratify as soon as possible, before going to the others. So the second item, second recommendation of the Trade Task Force is, which is well known to all of us, is this, unfortunately not going very well, is the protectionism. Non-tariff protectionism is increasing. And especially the localization barriers on trade is increasing. This is not a very good news, but we decided that as Trade Task Force that we will keep it in our recommendation, that the awareness should be there at least to really improve this. The third recommendation, which is an item that we couldn't go a deep dive into it, we just give the Chinese friends that they will hopefully go into more deep diving into it. This is the digital economy. The digital economy requires a further study, much more deep dive than we have not had the time to do it, and hopefully the Chinese will have a better work on it. But it requires a certain global understanding and approach in the digital economy, which is growing in great pace. We don't want to stop the pace or slow the pace, but there needs to be some regulation that needs to be thought about. So that's the 3 recommendations we are going ahead, and as I said, there is a opportunity of realizing the trade facilitation agreement in the first 6 months of the next year.
Terrific. That's you passed the elevator test for sure. Crystallized messages.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I want to turn it over to Ali.
You that this format's changed so many times. First 15 minutes, then 5 minutes, then 7, then 10, then 2 minutes, they said. So I'm going to take as much time as I can until you stop me.
Okay, I will time it.
First of all,
Given you 3
welcome
minutes.
to everybody who's coming from out of town. I hope you'll have an enjoyable stay here. Our understanding of this meeting was I was going to share with you what we were planning to present to the leaders, which was cut down from 7 minutes to 2 minutes, and get your feedback, but I don't know how we're going to do that. I think this is important for us. We're here because we started here as the Employment Task Force last year. Our first meeting was here, so it's a fitting finale. I want to thank each and every member who has contributed and made our lives easier, both physical meetings and conference calls through documentation. It's all most appreciated, and I think we did a good job. Of the 19 recommendations, policy recommendations that are being made, 3 of them are from the Employment Task Force. We had several more, but we consolidated all down to 3. I'm not going into detail too much because I want to share other things with you, but one detail for those who are not so familiar, just quickly the 3 items we have submitted, and hopefully at least one of them will get accepted. When you look at the track record of the past, many recommendations are not even aired in the communications, so let's keep our fingers crossed. Being in the communication doesn't guarantee implementation, but that's a good start, so let's keep our fingers crossed. One of the first one is basically having a business-friendly environment, making labor markets more dynamic and inclusive. Second is the issue of increasing youth unemployment, or youth employment, or decreasing unemployment. I have to tell you, I didn't know this was such a big problem until I got involved in this process, and it really is not in a sustainable situation. Among with that, female labor force participation. This was something carried on from the Australian presidency and included in our work too. And finally, developing and financing programs aimed at reducing skills mismatches, in particular technical, managerial, and entrepreneurial skills. Now, tomorrow, we were asked to concentrate on 2 topics. One was youth unemployment, and the second was skills issue within this 2 minutes. And in a nutshell, what we're trying to present tomorrow is this. Youth unemployment has been one of our key priorities from day one, as it is one of the most troubling symptoms of the broader employment problem. While global unemployment rate is still higher than its pre-crisis level, youth, women, and those who are at risk due to skills mismatches are the major vulnerable groups. We, as the B20 Employment Task Force, suggested systematical interventions to the urgent employment problems faced by the most vulnerable group. Although evaluated independently, when you look closer, the problems faced by these vulnerable groups are very much interrelated. For instance, actions aimed at skills mismatches with sport inclusivity, as the skills gap is one of the root causes of low female participation, as well as youth unemployment. But the problem with youth, I'd like to share 2 data with you. Youth unemployment rate is projected to be 13.1% globally, and it's still increasing in many countries. This is more than double the amount of overall unemployment. But more alarming is this data: the proportion of youth who are not in employment, education, or training. This is called NEET. Not in employment, education, or training stands at an average of 18.2% in OECD countries. This represents an even larger group at risk of marginalization from the labor markets. In our opinion, everybody talks about economic sustainability, but in our opinion, I think that's secondary in priority, because this scenario is not economically sustainable, but more importantly, it's not socially sustainable. If this is not addressed, it's going to result in a lot of social disruption in the very near term. So, we want to advocate to the G20 leaders, just like in the women's participation rate in Brisbane, a target was set. We'd like to emphasize very strongly that setting a realistic and measurable target for reducing youth unemployment, especially for low-skilled young people, would underline the commitment of G20 leaders for addressing this problem, as well as making it easier to track. Before moving on to the skills issue, I would like to note that youth unemployment is also very much interconnected with the ongoing refugee crisis. As the B20, we believe that refugee crisis cannot be understood and discussed in isolation from youth unemployment, because the most alarming fact about refugees is that almost half of these people are children. These children, of course, need food, shelter, and security, but just as importantly, it is our responsibility to equip them with the necessary skills that would help them to integrate into the societies where they are. In this sense, we urge G20 leaders to come up with a comprehensive and sustainable solution to the refugee crisis. This solution should not only target sheltering, but also aim at providing jobs, education, and skills. Skills issue. We'd like to note that this year's B20 Employment Task Force spent considerable amount of time on the skills issue in very different segments, but we had to consolidate it into one sentence, but this is also a very complicated matter. Skills mismatches and the lack of quality are on the agenda across the globe. Disruptive technologies changes and deepens the situation. In facing the challenges presented by the widening skills gap, governments and businesses should take more responsibility and, more importantly, urgently collaborate. For instance, developing a national education plan, the curriculum, and skills development policies, hand in hand with the business community, would make a huge paradigm shift in this matter. Hence, we urge G20 governments to develop and finance programs at reducing skills mismatches in the age of innovation and rapid technological change. In conclusion, no single recipe can tackle employment problems. Nevertheless, issues perpetuate one another. Hence, a multi-level intervention is needed, both in terms of issues to tackle and actors to be involved. Our belief is that a more realistic, more holistic approach, as represented in our policy recommendations, will serve G20 leaders to that end. Now, this is the 2 minutes we're trying to get involved. Now, our task members will be surprised because in our policy recommendations, there's nothing about refugee crisis. This is a fact. However, in due course of our task force works and policy recommendations, the refugee crisis has aggravated to a level where, in our opinion, it has become a global liability. As the business community, I believe we have a moral obligation to discuss this issue from our perspective. Just 3 data points I'd like to share with you. Today, 60 million people are away from their home countries or homes, are refugees from wars, persecution, global warming, various reasons. This is the highest number ever since World War II. But more alarming, a Gallup poll suggests that 13% of the world population would like to leave permanently where they live. This 13% is about 650 million people we are talking about. We did actually discuss the implications of cross-border immigration on labor markets in our task force. Indeed, we initially intended to make it a priority issue. We took it from 2 angles. One was voluntary migration, which is when you apply for a job, get a visa, and you go. Even that is hard these days. And second, and more alarming, is forced migration, migration against your choice. However, we were warned later, due to political sensitivities, to stay away from this topic. So we only included in our task force work, which is under business-friendly environment, migration by choice. Since then, Syrian refugee crisis took a different course of action, and it's at a stage also alarming. As we speak today in this luxury retreat, only miles away, people are fighting for survival. As the business community, we have a moral obligation to discuss this issue from all perspectives. It is time to take action, and these actions cannot be left to a couple of countries and only to governments. All stakeholders have to take responsibility and share the burden. At this point, I would like to note that, unfortunately, in social policies that are indispensable components of achieving sustainable economic growth, G20 has fallen where are we, sorry, has fallen very short of displaying the same sort of determination as it did redesign the global financial systems. As you know, after the economic crisis, serious measures were taken, institutions were involved outside of the G20, and policies were implemented, and today, especially the banking system, but the financial system in general is much more robust. But unfortunately, we don't see the same determination in other areas. We need a similar resolution from G20 leaders in making of social environmental policy. Social and environmental. This year we felt the dreadful consequences of this shortcoming with the refugee crisis. Our call to G20 leaders is to move global governance platforms, particularly the G20, from crisis management to a platform of risk management. To effectively achieve this role, our leaders need to rethink about the structure of this unique platform. G20 as it is today lacks the tools and authority to enforce implementation of agreed policies at the summits. The final communiques released after the leaders' summit simply serve as a wish list, rather than a strong commitment by our leaders to act upon agreed decisions. In order to change this, we suggest G20 platform could be turned into a more formal structure with permanent secretariat and staff, which was mentioned in the previous plenary session, and equipped with authority to enforce implementation of agreed upon reforms and policies. Or G20 could delegate implementation and monitoring to international organizations that have the necessary tools and power of enforcement. To conclude, employment in general, youth unemployment is specific, and are problems that call for urgent attention from our leaders. Evidently, and again unfortunately, current approaches are not sufficient in properly addressing these problems. This is neither socially nor economically sustainable. As a leading platform in global governance, we believe G20 has a key role in reversing the persistent problem. And one final note, do we have any Chinese representatives in the room?
Of course. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We were together a few minutes ago, sorry. You'll be hearing a lot of this in the next 36 hours, but until the Turkish presidency, unfortunately, there was no continuity in the process. Turkish presidency made sure certain topics were continued from the Australian presidency. I think incredible amount of work has been done. I understand you're changing the name of our task force from employment task force to innovation and human capital. I really hope you will take a good look at this in-depth work and hopefully continue most of it in your presidency. In the past, every presidency had its own agenda, worked on different issues, and so there was no continuity, and I think that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been enough implementation and thus success in the G20 work. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for your attention, and I hope if you have any feedback about tomorrow's messages, we'll be more than happy to hear them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koch, and I'm really glad that you guys are bringing up the refugee issue, even though it's not been discussed fully, because the world doesn't stand still, right? And you're constantly going to have to react to this, and this no one is going to say is an unimportant issue, so that's terrific to hear. Without further ado, I'm going to ask our colleague, Mr. Ayhan Zeytinoglu, who's the president of the, am I saying this, Kocaeli Industry Chambers, and was the coordinating chair of the anti-corruption task force. So relevant to the topic on trade, jobs and competitiveness, what do you want to report back to this group?
Thank you, Devan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As co-chair of the group, I would like to give you a brief outline of the activities and recommendations of the B20 Anti-Corruption Task Force during Turkey's B20 presidency. The team is made up of a lot of dedicated, intelligent, and experienced people, so it is no surprise that much good has come from their efforts this year. To all those involved, I now have the opportunity to say thank you. Firstly, let me outline the scale of the problems we are addressing. By its nature, there are no audited accounts, but the World Bank estimates that corruption costs the world economies between 2 and 3 trillion US dollars every year. The B20 task force, working closely with others, are addressing this drain on global growth. We estimate that if all our recommendations were completed, then the world economic growth would be 2% above the curve being achieved now. At the working level, who cares about these problems? Well, let me tell you that during this year, we have seen the number of companies and organizations working with our task force rise from 45 to 119 in less than 1 year. They are from all parts of the B20 and indeed beyond. Currently, the number of countries stand at 42. We see this as a sure sign that the companies themselves are concerned about the effects of corruption on their bottom lines. The business world believes we must reduce corruption in all areas. The B20 task force has focused on 5 areas. Public procurement. The private sector is a risk-averse when it comes to investment and infrastructure. So we are looking at digitizing in the medium term to reduce opportunities for illegal activities. In as short as 5 years, we could be long away down this road. This process applies in many areas of interaction with government, both local and central. Turkey's e-government system is a good example, providing a transparent, web-based portal for many aspects of public and official processes. Our recommendations also include high-level reporting systems, providing suitable places to report observed problems within the procurement process and deter further occurrences. Such a system is being trialed in Colombia with encouraging results. The second one is customs and border clearance. In the customs area, the digitization of processes will make a huge difference. We are working closely with businesses to judge the perceived differences before and after process changes. Here in Turkey, a public-private initiative is already well underway and has improved customer satisfaction as well as reducing process times at borders. And let's not forget, it saves money. It is a good example of best practices. The third one is beneficial ownership. Working with the G20 task force at unprecedented levels, we are striving to see the G20 principles on beneficial ownership implemented. Workshops are being held around the world to raise awareness. Most of the G20 countries have begun to realize that the use of national registers are central to this activity. Adherence to conventions. Although most G20 countries have signed up the UN or OECD conventions, we would like them to now to actively implement them. Of course, we would like to see more countries ratifying the conventions too. And the last, anti-corruption training for SMEs. SMEs are responsible for creating 60% of jobs globally, so helping this powerhouse of the economy is a challenge that we must rise to. We have already delivered a toolkit which raises awareness of the aspects of corruption as applied to SMEs. To clarify the level of cooperation between G20, we have had face-to-face meetings on 4 occasions. Such close contact was unheard of previously. The toolkit itself has been designed to help SMEs deal with all aspects of corruption, and it does so in an easily understood way. It includes things such as due diligence when choosing businesses to deal with, as well as practical guidance in how to avoid bribery attempts by others. So finally, if we can get acceptance of these recommendations from G20 and see them rolled out globally, then we will see the results reflected in the bottom line of the world economy. We know that reduced corruption equates directly to growth. Since we took this work on from Australia, we have made positive changes to our methodology, and we would hope to see these changes continue when China assumes the leadership role in 2016. I would offer the Chinese all the cooperation that they would wish for to carry on the good work of the B20 Anti-Corruption Task Force. In summary of our final recommendations to governments is to ratify, digitize, and implement. Thank you very much for your time in listening to me, and I hope that we have given you something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three of our coordinating chairs. So I want to now go to that second part to get some reactions from our other panelists. And we're going to be jumping around the panel a little bit here. I'd like to call on Phil O'Reilly first, chairman of BIAC, and BIAC has been a terrific supporter to the B20 process. So Phil, great to have you here. Would love to hear your views, right, on some of the structural reforms for dynamic and inclusive labor markets.
Well, thanks very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here, not just on behalf of BIAC today, but also on behalf of the International Organisation of Employers, so I'm wearing two hats today. Firstly, can I thank Ali very much for actually giving me so much fun in chairing this task force this year, and I notice a number of the staff members of the task force around the room, and on behalf of the other members of the task force, can I thank you very much for all the hard work that you did in bringing it together. It was not easy. This is one of those areas where the issues are complex. We can have very, very different views even in the business community, and I think the fact that we came out with, I thought, some really helpful, sensible, structured recommendations, I thought was a real credit to the process and to your work in it, so thank you very much. Just very briefly, what I'll be talking about tomorrow is the idea simply that we all know as business people, and that is that jobs don't happen in a vacuum. They happen because business people have a confidence to invest. When business people have a confidence to invest, jobs will tend to follow. And so the kind of messages I'll be giving leaders tomorrow is the idea of making sure that structural reform is pro-jobs and pro-growth, that structural reform is about giving businesses confidence to invest, confidence to grow, and that's about things like open and competitive markets, both for investment and for trade, access to finance, particularly for SMEs. A lot of work has been done this year on that through the Turkish presidency, a predictable regulatory environment, flexible labour markets, and measures to support innovation and entrepreneurship. I think it's going to be important for the Chinese presidency that we put those two together. Innovation and jobs are quite an important link. Now, part of that's about removing barriers to starting and operating a business. We know that the big job engines of growth in the world are not just small enterprises. Actually, it turns out they're startup small enterprises. They are new small enterprises. So the idea of ease of starting a business, that regulatory reform agenda around small business growth, access to finance and so on, very, very important, not just because it's important for businesses, but it's also important for those unemployed youth and those NEETs that Ali talked about in his presentation. Decreasing the burden of non-wage labour costs, creating attractive regulatory frameworks that encourage businesses to grow, thinking about the variety of employment relationships that are necessary in the business world today. Those will be the kinds of comments I will make tomorrow, and I'll be interested in any feedback that you have. The chairman asked for some thoughts about going forward. Let me give you two. The first is engagement. I thought Mr. Sorrell put it really, really well today when he talked about the importance of engagement, interactive, open, constructive engagement. We don't really have that in many economies in the business community. We need to push our governments both at national level and at multilateral level to have a far better interactive, open and constructive engagement with the business sector. And the second point I'll make is one that's been made already today, but it's the point about implementation. There's often a big difference between what's written down coming out of meetings like this and what governments go home and do. And it's very important and incumbent upon us in the business community to hold them to account. Write reports, do research, do surveys, publish it, so that we hold not just the politicians to account, but that we hold ourselves to account because of the processes that we're engaging in here and that we'll be engaging in China next year. Thanks for your time.
We're very pleased to, we're pleased to that you are here. You've been involved in the task force as well.
As a matter of fact, as an advisor, I have attended twice, that's all, unfortunately. So I'm a novice, and I want to start by giving my condolences to everybody in the world on what happened in Paris and what happened the day before in Lebanon. And I have the moral authority, more than any of you here. Not only am I Muslim, an Arab, and an honorary Turk. So I would like to condole everybody, and France and Lebanon, for what happened. But my task here is to address the issue of trade. And I would like to start with what Brother Ali Koch has made a comment that 13% or 650 million people from, as according to the Gallup poll, would like to leave their country and go elsewhere. And I would like to ask him and others, why do they want to leave? I know there are some better climates in Hawaii and Fiji and so forth, but the more important is that they do not find jobs at home. And please, let's not pass a trade and WTO law that will further exacerbate this situation. And this situation is exacerbated first because wrong definition by most people of subsidy. Trade is the whole idea of the WTO is to have people who have comparative advantage pass that on to the rest of the world. And that is not happening if you're going to start defining, having wrong definitions. Subsidy is like one man's meat is another man's poison. To one person, it's a meat, and it is something that they can make money out of because they are low-cost producer, and they should be allowed to enjoy the comparative advantage. To others, yes, subsidy, which is above full cost, which is under full cost, is a subsidy. So let us get that definition right so that we can have a proper WTO. But going to WTO, and I may ask Gula if she could be kind enough is to inject the fact that localization barriers is not necessarily that bad for a temporary purpose. So we should have a few years to allow countries that are developing to enjoy or to have their governments look after their protection. That's my words for today.
Thank you.
If anybody wants more, I can give them more ideas.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Alexei Mordashov, Chairman of the Board of Directors, PAO Sevastral, to address a few points on the global trade slowdown and how it's related to this particular topic area. Go ahead, Alexei.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's really very pity that we observe now the slowdown of trade in the world, because it seems that trade in the current circumstances is one of the few means available for us to boost global growth. And probably it's easily available and cheapest way to facilitate growth. According to the OECD study, each percentage point increase of trade in the country's GDP leads to growth of personal income in the country by from 1 to 3%. And also on the top of it, which looks more and more important, trade could be additional mean to improve interconnections between countries, which might lead eventually to the better political relationships. And unfortunately, we see additional witnesses of this problem in the current situation. And we have observed, thanks to lower tariffs and rising China, unprecedented growth in international trade at the beginning of 21st century. Before 2008, global trade grew up on average by 9% every year, far above the GDP growth rate in the world, which was, I believe, and we all in our group believe, was a strong facilitator of overall GDP growth in the world. And, but unfortunately, in 2012-2014, we observe slowdown of global growth of trade, just to 1.1% roughly. And it's a big issue. Of course, thanks to the G20 and B20 efforts, we have avoided, after 2008, Great Depression trade war scenario. But unfortunately, like Madam Sabanci already have mentioned, we see growth of protectionism measures in the world. According to the WTO study, about 700 protectionism measures were registered since the beginning of the monitoring in 2008. And definitely we need additional boost, additional impetus from the G20 leaders to push liberalization and invigorate international trade. And we believe that a big achievement was Ministerial Conference of WTO in Bali in 2013, and which has completed agreement on trade facilitation. And if you speak about the practical measures to improve the situation, I just can only echo what Madam Sabanci just has presented as a leader of our group, our chairman, that basically, first of all, we have to call G20 countries to stay adherent to the fight with protectionism and liberalize trade as much as possible, and on the top of it, to reduce trade barriers, low administrative barriers, unproductive costs related with trade, and first of all, through the rapid implementation, of course, ratification and implementation of trade facilitation agreement, which will bring about 1 trillion to the global GDP and about 20 million jobs. And I believe that it should be a strong message from the business community. And also we all believe that business should stay engaged in the process of implementation to facilitate this and also to monitor the effectiveness of this implementation in all our countries. Thank you.
Much. Appreciate that. And now I have the distinct honor of turning it over and asking Sam Walsh, CEO of Rio Tinto. Gulair Hanem had commented on the digital economy and trade, and that we haven't, done enough on that. And I understand that you could perhaps give us some oversight on digital technology in trade from your point of view and from your industry's point of view.
Well, thank you very much. And some of you may wonder why somebody from mining is talking about the digital age. But let me say that we have progressed. My company introduced automated trucks 8 years ago when Google and others hadn't even thought of it. And we now run 70 of those trucks. Let me say, one moon buggy on the moon is fairly easy to control, but try and control 70 at the same time. It's actually a log scale in complexity. These trucks so far have driven 4 million kilometres, around 100 times around the planet, and they've moved 400 million tonnes of material. So we've proven that autonomous trucks work. Same time we're automating drills, same time we're automating our rail. First heavy haul rail in the world to be automated. Mind you, it's costing us $500 million, so it is a big project. The other aspect that I'd comment on is that mining and minerals actually provide the materials that the modern world needs to develop, including your computer screens, including your iPhones. Without us, they wouldn't actually exist, as well as your power, as well as your light-weighted vehicles, as well as the infrastructure and everything else that we've been talking about. But specifically, the B20 class of 2015 has 7 recommendations to help unlock the full potential of the digital economy, which in turn will increase competitiveness and global economic growth. And whilst all of these points are important, I'd like to close by adding my personal support specifically to recommendations 3 and 4. 3, improving digital infrastructure across the G20 will allow companies like mine to share more knowledge across boundaries, develop the capabilities of our global workforces, and create more prosperity for our host countries. Similarly, recommendation 4, focusing on STEM education, science, technology, engineering and mathematics, in collaboration with the business community, will ensure there'll be future generations of highly skilled workers appropriately trained to join our companies and become the future leaders of our businesses tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. And I'd like to turn now to Peter Holk Nielsen, CEO of Novozymes. Peter, if you could comment on the jobs and competitiveness arena, what gives you nightmares? What keeps you awake at night?
Well, I usually sleep pretty well at night, but I think the point is very well established in B20 that growth is necessary for our societies to continue to develop and to continue to prosper. And that, of course, has a lot to do with job creation, and I think the Turkish leadership has in a very efficient way, put inclusiveness on the agenda. And personally, I think that's very important to consider as we move forward. I think one of the things that having participated in 3 of the B20s now, one of the things that is remarkable about the Turkish leadership is that it's kind of building on what happened in Brisbane and some of the previous B20s, and I think that's a very good model to keep building rather than reinventing everything. So as we staircase towards nirvana, if you like, I think we can do an awful lot more in terms of providing inclusive jobs. And as some of you will know, one of my key concerns is about sustainability. I think growth is a given and very well argued. I actually think growth is a prerequisite for solving our sustainability issues. On the other hand, I also believe that growth has to be sustainable. So these 2 things are interlinked and actually also interlinked with a third thing, which I believe is political stability. So one thing I would be looking for is to have create better frameworks for making companies invest in innovation that makes us all more sustainable. I think that's going to be incredibly important for us all as we go forward. There's so many things that businesses could actually do to become more sustainable, but it also requires that the framework gets created. And I think that, at least in my mind, is something that we need to get more on the agenda of B20, so it's not only growth, but it's also sustainable growth. Innovation is key to this, and I think, not that I can actually prove the point, but at least in many of these potential areas where we can become more sustainable, it often involves a lot more localization and therefore actually much more inclusive growth and job creation. And I think that's a point that is worthwhile exploring as we continue to staircase towards nirvana. I think it's important to, let me just close off with a bit of a tagline, but I think it's important to understand that our businesses cannot succeed in a world that fails. So we simply have to embrace the concept of sustainability more and better than we do right now. Growth in itself is not enough. It has to be sustainable growth, and companies can invest in innovation and create jobs by catering for those needs. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I now turn over to Jeff Hardy, who is a director in the International Chamber of Commerce. Jeff, your vast views on SMEs as they relate to competitiveness and this topic, as well as if you have comments on trade as well.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. On the subject of SMEs and the World SME Forum, the message tomorrow from REFAT and from the B20 is largely to call on the G20 to endorse the WSF and to mandate it as the lead implementing agency for the recommendations that the SME task force put together this year. So it's a pretty simple and clear recommendation to the G20, and earlier today I'm sure you all heard Deputy Prime Minister Yilmaz when he listed what he considered would be the short list of achievements for Turkey this year. He included the WSF amongst those achievements, and he referenced the fact that the WSF has already been endorsed by finance ministers, G20 finance ministers. So I think we could look at this effort as at the end of the process, and I think when we see the communique, I think we'll probably be very pleased with the outcome. But the end of the process is really the beginning of the process, because the WSF is just being established now. So what I thought I might do is just take 30 seconds to tell you how we got to that point. And I think it's an important model for the B20 to consider going forward. Because what you had is an intersection of government priorities, B20 task forces, and then an implementation response. So this all started at the Brisbane Summit with the Brisbane Action Plan and the Brisbane Communique, which specifically called out SMEs, reforming the competitive environment for SMEs, and particularly calling on SME finance. So the government of Turkey responded very clearly to that statement in Brisbane, and former Deputy Prime Minister Babacan was the leader of that here for the government of Turkey, who made it a priority. The government of Turkey makes it a priority, communicated with the B20 task force this year. We made it a priority. REFAT created for the first time an SME task force who set out during the year to really assess what was missing and which elements needed to be supplied to unlock the potential of SMEs. And that's precisely what happened. The ultimate outcome of this was the WSF, and then we've been, engaging really on the political front to get traction for it. I think a real success for us would be able to sit here next year and report to you, how we had implemented various parts of the task force's recommendations and what the G20's response to that is.
Here, in China.
In China, in this room, in different location.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Now I'd like to turn to Yu Ping. And Yuping, please be as expansive as you want. I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about the China's efforts, perhaps on the multilateral global trading system, but feel free to address some of the other issues that came up with regards to how China might handle them going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to, at this point, concentrate on some trade issues. I think this year, the three key recommendations on TFA, standstill commitment, and emerging digital economy put forward by the Trade Task Force are very good and very important, and they could become useful measures to improve international trade order if the G20 government adopt these recommendations and take some actions policy-wise. And we do hope that the government will listen and take the recommendations very seriously. In the upcoming 2016 China B20, we would like to we like the trade topics to continue on this year's basis and catch up with the latest situation. Here, I'd like to emphasize 2 points in particular. First, we would like to see that the G20 plays a full role in some areas. They are the global economic governance, establish trade and investment cooperation mechanism, and facilitating environment under the G20 framework. And the third area is maintain multilateral trading system. And the fourth area is support free trade agreement. And the fifth area is opposed to trade protectionism. Trade among G20 countries accounts for 80% of the global total and plays a crucial role in the worldwide economy. Currently, G20 trade and investment mechanism is lagging behind with no regular trade ministers meeting schedule. Therefore, we believe it is quite urgent and absolutely necessary to institutionalize trade and investment cooperation under G20 framework, because we believe trade and investment are important sources for economic growth and job creation. Furthermore, B20's promotion and maintenance of multilateral trading system and regional trade agreements are practical and should serve the interests of all stakeholders. We believe that regional trade agreements should be pursued on the basis of supporting and complementing the multilateral trading system in perspective of industrial and commercial sectors. The second point is we should strive to faithfully implement trade facilitation agreement, streamline custom procedures, and enhance efficiency. This is a traditional topic among recent B20 discussions and draws attention across business world. At present, as we all know, only about 10 G20 members have approved the TFA, so more efforts should be made to urge the other 10 member countries to ratify the TFA. So next year for the Trade Task Force, we would like to continue most of the efforts that have been done this year and try to reinforce some of the issues if they are not adopted this year, and the business communities think they are important for the government to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuping. This has been terrific. I think we've gone through all our panelists, but I really want to open it up to all of you. Please, for the benefit of everyone, just state who you are and then make your comment or question, as it were. And if we can get as much of them as possible, that'll be terrific. So I see your name. Please go ahead.
Abdurrahman Zamil, Chairman of the Saudi Chambers of Commerce. I really wanted to speak on behalf of oil-producing countries and on behalf of the remaining poor countries in the world. because we are here, the rich of the riches. I really thank our friend from Australia who concentrated on corruption. Nobody will listen to this organization or to this group if we don't really tackle corruption immediately. Corruption not only costs $3 billion, it really destroys nations. Look what's happening in the Arab world, in Africa. It has nothing to do with religious conflicts or tribal conflict. It's all poverty with countries that are rich. Now, corruption, my friend, has to be your priority because the actors of corruption are two. The receiver. These are, in the third world, are individuals, powerful. Nobody can touch them. The giver, your companies, the West, America, Korea, China. These are companies that are supposed to be ruled by highly moralized principle. When a company in UK or in Italy or in France or make a decision to give to somebody in oil-producing country $200 million bribe, who makes this decision? Not area manager, not president, it's the board of directors. Board of directors, my friends, are the cream of your society. It's not individual. In our case, they are highly powerful individual, has nothing to do with government only. We don't have corrupt government or corrupt countries. We have individuals. That's why when they disappear, you find that corruption in that particular area. Now, I honestly think that it's a shame that nobody really looked at that serious. How come these highly moralized, supposedly, pays $2 to $3 billion in order to destroy nations? Now, unless this group, I have said it, and the second B2, and I said, if you don't pay attention, I will not show up. I did not show up. Today, I showed up again, and I'm telling you, corruption is what's hindering competitiveness, what's hindering unemployment, what's increasing all the problems. Unless it is number one priority of this group, your life all the time. Look, my friend, what's happening. Competition between corporations in the West. It's not even China, England, whatever. Why are they competing? The opportunities are unlimited. Why should they pay? Please, this is what I really beg you. It has destroyed all oil-producing countries, all Africa, everywhere. I think we should have blacklist that we sponsor any company that's been accused. We should really publicize it. We should really teach a corporation that it is their responsibility to eliminate this disease.
Thank you very much. We'll definitely take note of that. I want to turn it to you, and then I got a note saying that Mr. Paul Bulke of the CEO of Nestle, who was actually on the panel but stepped out, is back now, and I want to give him an opportunity to chime in. Paul, where are you?
I'm here.
There you are. Okay. I'll let you go first, and then you can take the floor for a bit.
Okay, thank you. I'm Charles Gould. I'm the Director General of the International Cooperative Alliance, and we represent cooperatives in all sectors of the economy, including insurance cooperatives and mutuals, cooperative financial institutions and credit unions, agricultural cooperatives, et cetera. We just concluded our global conference here in Antalya yesterday, and it was attended by cooperatives leaders from 80 countries across all parts of the world. And there we released our annual World Cooperative Monitor, which tracks the performance of cooperatives. And that shows that cooperatives have outperformed the general economy this year, looking at the 300 largest, and they've now reached $2.4 trillion US in turnover for the 300 largest. The insurance cooperatives and mutuals is growing in particular, now comprising 27% of the insurance market. And this is complemented by a recent jobs report that reports that 250 million people either are employed by or organize their livelihood through a cooperative. We see the B20 as an important venue for topics that are critical to cooperatives as they are for all other businesses. And we appreciate being welcomed here and having our voice included. As we go forward, particularly as innovation and human capital are combined, we think there is an opportunity to have a greater understanding of the impact of models of business like the cooperatives and the potential that they can have on all of these issues. So thank you.
Paul, please.
Good afternoon. Actually, also reacting on corruption, I would say I can only express how happy I am that I'm in the B20, not in the G20, because we can go about our business the way we want to go about our business. So we want to go about our business honest, we go about our business honest. I think it is also why the B20 is so important in other matters like trade. Because at the end of the day, we can go about our activities without having the next election blurring our side and our perspective. Speaking about trade, it has never been so clear that open markets and free trade is actually the driver of growth and development. And everybody is agreeing on that. Everybody is agreeing on that, everybody knows it. And yet, we see the protectionism coming up again. That has been also accelerated by the financial crisis. Thousands of measures were taken, and we see still the majority of them, in spite of all the nice words, still being active. 80% of them are still active. The thousands of new ones that came up. Yet we have, and you have to be very simple when you go to the G20, because you cannot ask too much. There's too many of them talking and having short-eyed interests. I think if you just see what a free trade can do, and we're speaking about GDP, 1 trillion more, we have the numbers out there, you see them in your documents, 1 trillion more GDP can be created only by opening up what was agreed upon the trade facilitation agreement, only that. Millions and millions of jobs, we're speaking about stabilizing countries that are in turmoil. Well, it's job creation, it's creating the local economies. We know that trade is not a matter of trading products from one side or selling products. It's production. Trade, open trade, has to do with value chains upstream and job creation. All that we all know. And fact is, we have a trade facilitation agreement that was laborious, 10 years in the making, 2013 December approved. We are 2 years later, only 51 countries have ratified it. And we need something like over nicely, just 108 countries should ratify it before it gets into force. I think that is a request that we should, as B20, set very clearly to the G20 to influence, to at least do and approve and accredit these trade facilitation agreement as a concrete step. We can talk about free trade and the major macros. That's a very concrete thing. They have already agreed upon that trade facilitation. We just have to make now landing that into the local country-by-country agreement so that they enforce that. That is a very concrete ask from the B20, and I think we should not complicate too much. Only ask that and see what reaction we get.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am Bernard Spitz, and I represent the French Employers Association. And in the name of the French employees, I would like starting to thank our Turkish hosts and all of you, basically, for your words of support and friendship. After what happened yesterday, it warms up our heart, and we know that we must continue to fight over terrorism and obscurantism, and we will. Coming back to our points, I just have 2 points, which are in line with the report of the task force. It's about what I would call then the outsiders of the economy, those who are left behind, basically, in terms of revenue and opportunities. I mean the women and the youth. Regarding women, we consider that gender equality is not only a question of fairness or even a social justice issue, it's a question of professional efficiency, of modernization of our economies, and of competitiveness for business. So we have three priorities. One is education and skills training from an early age in areas of study linked to key economic sectors such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, where we see a big difference between careers for men and women. Focus on reducing the gender pay gap, and ensure greater work-life balance through, among other things, investment in the child care sector so that women can enter or re-enter the labor market. And the second point is about the young people. We know in France, for instance, we have 25% of unemployment, and we know this is even worse in some countries among the 20. We need to invest more in youth and to focus on apprenticeship, especially with priority on digital. We need to have the employers in the middle of the system, because when they are left apart, it doesn't work. And we expect to put this focus on this apprenticeship and especially exchanges between countries. We do that between France and Germany, we do that between France and Canada, and we hope that this will be something for the future, a good solution for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand actually that the President is going to be here at 5:30 and we need to close, so I'm going to give you the word and you as well, because I saw your hands, but make it very quick and short and sharp. Thank you.
Thank you, Dev. My name is Sean Tarbuck. I'm the CEO of the International Cooperative and Mutual Insurance Federation that brings together 27% of the world's insurance. I just want to make a comment about an initiative that I think really fits well with the B20 and all of the targets we have. Raising people's standards of living and giving them a security of life and protection of property is vital to create jobs and growth. It's a basic requirement of the SDGs. Hence, the commitment from the G7 earlier this year of protecting an additional 400 million of the poorest people from natural disasters is crucial to delivering global growth. The G7 commitment is split into 300 million being protected by government schemes and 100 million expected from the business sector. That's our sector. The mutual insurance sector will announce next month at the COP21 in Paris that we will protect 25 million by 2020, which is 25% of the G7 business sector commitment. We're doing this through our 555 strategy. With security and protection from disasters, people can create jobs and can create growth. In addition, it can link the G7 to the G20 for better coordination, which was asked for earlier, and really talks to the B20 commitment to inclusion. It also creates sustainable growth in communities that need it the most. So we'd like to put this forward as an initiative that maybe others would like to join as well from this particular sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you have the last word, and then I'll sum up very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morris Reed with Mercury Group. I was struck by something that Ali said, and Ali, give your brother Mustafa my regards, please. It doesn't make sense to come here and have these meetings and the governments don't do anything. What is the strategy, really, to put pressure on these governments outside of these meetings to move things on? There has to be some stickiness, and I hope that there is some conversations between Turkey and China to really push the agenda forward, because when Ali said that he puts things and some of these things don't show up, to me that is just repeating, doing this year after year. If there's nothing done, seems to be a waste of time. And then the last point I would make is we talked a lot about youth and women, and I look at the panel, and I love this panel, but all due respect, it's not very young and it's not very diverse. So I would simply say that if you truly want to have impact on youth and women, you may want to invite them to the table. You may want to give them a role, and I would suggest that going to China, where there are great entrepreneurs, some of my friends, I hope that there will be women and youth CEOs that run big, important companies actually at the table playing a role. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well said. And I'd like thank the panelists. I think they've given us a good sense of what's going to be delivered tomorrow, and also the points that many of you have made with passion. Thank you for all of those. And I'm sure Yu Ping would agree with me that if you've got any more ideas, please direct them to Yu Ping and offer him the suggestions, because I think our Chinese colleagues will be very happy with that. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thank you.
All right.